Have you ever noticed that the people who ignore your boundaries rarely do it all at once? They don't arrive announcing that they won't respect your time, your energy, or your decisions. It starts with something so small, you almost feel guilty for noticing it. They ask for a little more than you're comfortable giving. They dismiss a small no. They expect one more favor. And somehow, months later, you're wondering how someone became so comfortable crossing lines you never wanted crossed in the first place. The confusing part is that you usually don't realize it's happening until you're already exhausted. You keep thinking the next conversation will be different, that if you explain yourself more clearly, become more patient, or stay calm for just a little longer, they'll finally understand where your limits are. Instead, every compromise quietly becomes the new expectation. What once felt like a favor slowly becomes your responsibility, and saying no begins to feel like you're taking something away that was never theirs to begin with. Most people believe boundaries are respected because they are communicated well enough. They think the right words, the right tone, or the right explanation will finally make people understand. But that's rarely the real problem. The hidden reason people continue crossing your boundaries has very little to do with what you've said. It has everything to do with what your behavior has quietly taught them to expect. And once that expectation is established, changing it becomes far more uncomfortable than creating it ever was. This is why two people can hear the exact same boundary and respond in completely different ways. One person hears your no and adjusts because they see it as information. The other hears it as an obstacle to overcome. They don't immediately push harder. They test how permanent your boundary really is. They watch what happens after you feel guilty. They watch what happens after they become disappointed. And that's often where the real decision is made, not by them, but by you. Think about the moments when someone ignored your boundary for the first time. They asked again after you already said no. They kept calling after you said you were busy. They made a joke at your expense after you asked them to stop. In that moment, they weren't just asking for your time or your attention. They were asking a much deeper question. They were trying to discover whether your boundary was a decision or merely a preference. And many people unknowingly answer that question by abandoning their own limits the moment discomfort appears. The mistake isn't that you care too much. It's that you've been taught to believe discomfort means you've done something wrong. So when someone becomes upset, distant, or disappointed because you enforced a boundary, your instinct is to repair the relationship instead of protecting the boundary. You start negotiating with yourself. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should explain it differently. Maybe I should make one exception. But to someone watching your actions, that exception doesn't look like kindness. It looks like permission. What makes this even more difficult is that people rarely announce they are testing you. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It often looks like affection, urgency, habit, or even vulnerability. They tell you nobody else understands them. They remind you how much they need you. They frame your boundary as rejection instead of self-respect. Before long, you stop asking whether their request is reasonable and start asking whether you're a bad person for refusing it. That shift is where your boundary quietly stops belonging to you. Here's something most people never notice. The first time you sacrifice a boundary, you usually believe you're protecting the relationship. But the person on the other side may experience something completely different. They learn that your decisions become negotiable under enough emotional pressure. They learn that persistence works. They learn that guilt changes your mind. Over time, they stop treating your boundaries as fixed because your own behavior has taught them they are temporary. The hidden reason they keep crossing the line is that somewhere along the way, the line stopped feeling real to them. If you're recognizing yourself in this, You're beginning to see patterns that most people spend years blaming on other people. That's exactly why I wrote my private ebook, The Art of Strategic Indifference. It's for people who want to stop being controlled by guilt, approval, and emotional pressure, and start thinking more clearly about themselves and the people around them. It's completely free, it's only available to viewers of this channel, and you'll find the link in the description if you'd like to continue exploring these ideas. This is why people who have the strongest boundaries are not always the loudest or the most confrontational. In fact, many barely explain themselves at all. They understand something that most people don't. A boundary is not strengthened by a better argument. It is strengthened by consistency. Every time your actions match your words, people become less interested in testing them. Every time your actions contradict your words, they become more curious about where your limit actually is. The real conversation was never happening through your explanations. It was happening through your patterns. And this reveals a truth that feels uncomfortable at first. People do not build their expectations around your intentions. They build them around your history. If your history says that your no eventually becomes a yes, that your silence eventually becomes compliance, or that your frustration eventually turns into another compromise, that history becomes more believable than anything you say today. The past quietly becomes the script they expect you to follow, and unless you change the pattern, they'll keep assuming the ending will always be the same. Most people assume respect is something another person chooses to give you. They spend years trying to become more likable, more understanding, more patient, believing those qualities will naturally lead to healthier relationships. But respect follows a different set of rules. Kindness can make people appreciate you. Generosity can make people enjoy being around you. Neither guarantees they will stop crossing your boundaries. Respect begins the moment people realize that your limits are no longer influenced by their emotional reactions. The people who struggle most with boundaries are often the people who value harmony the most. You've probably caught yourself softening your words before saying no, smiling so the other person doesn't feel rejected, adding long explanations so they won't misunderstand your intentions. You aren't trying to deceive anyone. You're trying to make your boundary painless. But that's where another hidden problem appears. The more you try to remove every trace of discomfort from your boundary, the more you unintentionally teach others that your comfort is always negotiable, while theirs is something you must protect. This is why people who genuinely respect boundaries often don't need many conversations about them. They don't spend their lives reminding everyone where the line is, because the line has already been established through repeated experience. Others know what happens when that limit is crossed, not because there is punishment or anger waiting on the other side, but because the response is predictable. There is no bargaining, no emotional negotiation, no exceptions made simply because someone became uncomfortable. Consistency quietly removes the incentive to keep testing what will never move. There's another pattern that almost nobody talks about. The people who repeatedly cross your boundaries are often paying close attention to your reaction after you enforce them. They expect hesitation. They expect guilt. They expect you to check their face, their tone, or the silence that follows to decide whether you've done something wrong. The moment your confidence depends on their approval, your boundary is no longer standing on your decision. It's standing on their emotional permission. And that is exactly where many boundaries quietly begin to collapse. The moment you stop looking for approval after setting a boundary, something unexpected happens. You begin seeing people more clearly. Some adjust without much resistance because they respected you all along. Others become noticeably frustrated, distant, or even offended. At first, that reaction can feel like proof you've made a mistake. In reality, it often reveals something far more important. The boundary didn't damage the relationship. It exposed a relationship that depended on your willingness to ignore your own limits. Once you understand this, You stop asking a completely different question. Instead of wondering, how do I make people respect my boundaries? You begin asking, what have I been teaching people about what happens when they ignore them? That question changes everything, because it shifts your attention away from controlling other people's behavior and toward understanding the patterns you've been reinforcing without realizing it. And that's where your real influence begins. The difficult part is that changing this pattern rarely feels empowering in the beginning. It feels selfish. It feels cold. It feels as though you're becoming someone you never wanted to be. That's because your mind has confused self-sacrifice with being a good person for so long that protecting yourself now feels unnatural. But feeling unfamiliar doesn't mean you're becoming worse. It often means you're finally stepping outside a role you've been expected to play. And people who benefited from that role are usually the first to make you question it. There's one final belief that keeps people trapped. They think enforcing a boundary is about changing someone else's behavior. It isn't. You cannot control whether another person accepts your limits, agrees with them, or even likes them. What you control is whether crossing those limits still gives them access to your time, your attention, and your energy. The hidden reason some people never respect your boundaries is not because they fail to understand them. It's because until now they haven't had any reason to believe your boundaries would remain in place when they challenge them. The real change begins when you stop seeing boundaries as something you say and start seeing them as something you live. They are not speeches. They are patterns. Every decision either reinforces them or quietly weakens them. People are always learning what your limits mean, not from your words, but from what happens after those words are spoken. Once your actions become predictable, something else becomes predictable too. The people who only valued access begin to disappear, while the people who value you learn exactly where your boundaries truly stand. Most people spend years waiting for one conversation that will finally make others understand them. They rehearse better explanations, choose softer words, and hope that this time their boundary will be accepted without resistance. But respect has never depended on finding the perfect sentence. It depends on whether you're willing to let people experience the consequences of ignoring your limits without rushing in to rescue them from the discomfort. The moment you stop protecting people from the outcome of their own choices is often the moment your boundaries stop feeling optional. A surprising thing happens when you become consistent with your boundaries. You stop feeling the need to monitor every interaction so closely. You no longer spend hours replaying conversations, wondering if you were too firm or too distant. That constant mental exhaustion begins to fade because your decisions are no longer being negotiated after the fact. The boundary doesn't end when the conversation ends. It stays intact. And for the first time, your peace of mind is no longer dependent on whether someone else approves of the choices you made. One day you'll realize that the people who genuinely belong in your life were never the ones who demanded unlimited access to it. They were the ones who accepted that your time, your attention, and your peace of mind had value beyond their immediate needs. The hidden reason people never respected your boundaries was never hidden inside them. It was hidden inside the quiet patterns you repeated every time discomfort convinced you to abandon yourself. Change those patterns, and you don't just create stronger boundaries. You become someone whose limits no longer need defending, because they are reflected in every choice you make. And perhaps that's the biggest psychological shift of all. You stop measuring the health of a relationship by how little conflict it contains and start measuring it by how much truth it can survive. A relationship that only works when you ignore your own limits was never built on respect. It was built on access. The moment you understand that difference, protecting your boundaries no longer feels like pushing people away. It feels like making room for the people who never needed you to abandon yourself in order to stay. The people who seem impossible to manipulate are not people who never feel guilt, pressure, or disappointment. They feel all of those things. The difference is that they no longer treat those emotions as instructions. They understand that someone else's frustration is not automatically evidence that they've acted unfairly. Once you separate emotion from obligation, an unexpected kind of freedom appears. You stop reacting to every feeling that enters the room, and you start making decisions based on your values instead of someone else's temporary emotional state. The irony is that the stronger your boundaries become, the less often you need to defend them. People begin adjusting long before a conflict has the chance to grow because your behavior has become predictable. They know that pressure won't change your decision, guilt won't reopen the conversation, persistence won't create an exception. That predictability is what most people mistake for confidence. It isn't about sounding more certain or appearing more dominant. It's about becoming someone whose actions quietly remove the hope that your limits can be negotiated. Eventually you realize that boundaries were never about teaching other people how to behave. They were about teaching yourself what you will no longer tolerate. That is a very different kind of power because it doesn't depend on changing anyone else's mind. It depends on becoming someone who no longer abandons their own judgment just to keep the peace. And when that shift finally happens, respect stops feeling like something you have to earn from other people. It becomes a natural consequence of the standards you quietly refuse to betray. The hidden reason people never respected your boundaries was never that they couldn't hear you. It was that they had learned through repeated experience that your boundaries could be separated from your behavior. The moment those two become inseparable, everything changes. You become calmer because you stop carrying the impossible responsibility of managing everyone else's reactions. You become clearer because your decisions no longer depend on approval. And you become harder to manipulate because the strongest boundary was never the one you spoke. It was the one you quietly refused to betray. Very few people ever notice the quiet cost of living without real boundaries. It isn't only that other people ask for too much. It's that you slowly lose the ability to trust yourself. Every time you ignore your own limits to avoid disappointing someone else, you send yourself the same message. My needs can wait. My judgment can be questioned. My peace is negotiable. After enough repetitions, the greatest loss isn't respect from others. It's confidence in your own decisions. Once you begin protecting your own boundaries consistently, something unexpected happens inside you. Decisions become quieter. You stop searching every face for signs that you've upset someone. You stop rewriting conversations in your head, wondering if you should have explained yourself differently. The mental noise that once followed every difficult interaction begins to disappear. Not because people suddenly become easier, but because your self-respect is no longer waiting for their approval before it allows you to feel at peace. This is where many people misunderstand what strength actually looks like. They imagine it means becoming emotionally cold, refusing to care, or shutting everyone out. But real strength is much quieter than that. It allows you to care without surrendering your judgment. It allows you to be generous without becoming endlessly available. It allows you to be compassionate without accepting behavior that repeatedly violates your peace. The strongest boundaries don't make you less human. They simply stop your kindness from being used against you. The people who benefit most from your lack of boundaries will often be the least comfortable when you finally develop them. Not because you've become unfair, but because the relationship has changed in a way they didn't choose. They were accustomed to unlimited access, immediate availability, and quiet compliance. When those patterns disappear, they may call you different, distant, or difficult. But what they're often reacting to isn't the boundary itself. They're reacting to the loss of a version of you that always placed their comfort above your own. The most important change isn't that people start respecting every boundary you set. Some never will. The real change is that their reaction no longer determines your next decision. You stop seeing resistance as a sign to retreat and start recognizing it as information. It tells you who respects your autonomy and who only respected your compliance. That clarity is something no amount of people-pleasing could ever give you, because it only appears when you finally stop negotiating with your own convictions. When you reach this point, you also stop expecting everyone to understand your boundaries. That expectation quietly disappears because you realize understanding was never the requirement. Acceptance isn't something you can force. Respect isn't something you can negotiate. Your responsibility ends with making your boundary clear and living by it consistently. What another person chooses to do with that information belongs to them. And that distinction frees you from carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: every boundary you keep is also a promise you make to yourself. It says that your time has value, your energy has limits, and your peace is worth protecting even when doing so creates temporary discomfort. The more often you keep that promise, the more your relationship with yourself begins to change. And once you trust yourself to protect what matters, you stop looking to other people to tell you what your life should cost. In the end, the hidden reason people never respected your boundaries was never hidden inside other people. It was hidden inside a pattern you were never taught to recognize. You believed boundaries were words that needed to be understood. In reality, they are decisions that need to be lived. The moment your actions become stronger than your explanations, people begin seeing you differently. More importantly, you begin seeing yourself differently. And that quiet shift is where real respect always begins. If this video changed the way you think about boundaries, then the real work begins with recognizing these patterns in your own life before they become habits again. If you'd like to explore these ideas more deeply, you can download my free private ebook, The Art of Strategic Indifference. It's written specifically for people who want to become more emotionally independent, mentally disciplined, and difficult to manipulate. You'll find the link in the description. I'm also curious to hear your experience. What is the hardest boundary you've ever had to keep, and why was it so difficult? If you genuinely found value in this video, consider leaving a like. And if you're interested in understanding human nature, emotional independence, strategic thinking, power dynamics, discipline, and self-mastery, subscribe so you don't miss future videos. The next video on your screen expands this philosophy even further, and I think it will change the way you see people in ways you may not expect. And if you're someone who wants to explore these ideas at their deepest level, you'll find my Patreon in the description as well. It's a private space where I share psychological observations, deeper breakdowns, and ideas that aren't designed for public platforms, but for people who are serious about mastering human behavior and themselves. Both the free ebook and Patreon are linked below.